We've been told that life is about finding happiness, right? Wrong. Life is about pursuing meaning, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And that's exactly what Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos. This book doesn't offer quick fixes or empty promises. It provides a roadmap for navigating the complexities of existence by embracing responsibility, truth, and the inherent struggle of being human. Here at 10x Wiser, we deliver transformative insights, empowering you to solve challenges and become your best self. We explore the wisdom of great books and distill their lessons into actionable advice. If you're ready to level up your life, smash that like button, drop a comment with your biggest takeaway from this video, and subscribe for more life-changing content. Every like, comment, and subscribe helps us reach more people and spread this valuable knowledge. And now, let's dive deep into the wisdom of 12 Rules for Life. Welcome our host and guest for today's podcast, Tony and Harper.
Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always ready.
Great. Today we're digging into Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
Oh, this should be interesting. A lot of people are talking about this book.
Right, and for good reason. It's not your typical self-help book.
Definitely not.
I mean, it touches on science, psychology, philosophy, and even like ancient stories,
It's a pretty wild ride.
Yeah, it is. All to help us better understand ourselves and how to live a more meaningful life.
More meaning. Who doesn't want that?
Right, exactly. And speaking of meaning, one of the first things Peterson talks about is lobsters.
Lobsters.
Lobsters. Rule 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back.
I remember that one. Interesting rule.
Well, he actually starts off with lobsters and their social hierarchies.
Okay, I'm not sure I see the connection. What do lobsters have to do with this?
That's the genius of Peterson. He ties it all together. He explains how both lobsters and humans have this built-in drive to compete. Yeah, for resources, status, that kind of thing. And it turns out the winners in these dominance hierarchies, both for lobsters and humans, tend to have higher levels of serotonin.
Serotonin, the happy chemical.
Yeah, exactly. It's linked to confidence, well-being, even how long you live.
Wow, so it's more than just feeling good.
Much more. Peterson even brings in this thing called Price's Law.
Price's Law. I'm not familiar with that one.
It basically says that in any field, the top performers tend to get most of the rewards.
The rich get richer.
Kind of, but it's broader than that. It applies to all sorts of hierarchies, not just money.
Social status, even access to information.
Exactly. So Peterson argues that understanding these dominance hierarchies is super important for navigating life effectively.
So are we back to lobsters now?
We are. Remember that posture thing? Stand up straight with your shoulders back?
Oh, yeah. Right.
It's not just about looking confident. It's about signaling to your brain and to others that you're not backing down.
It's like faking it till you make it.
In a way, yeah. But it's rooted in biology.
Interesting.
So if you're feeling overlooked or just kind of slumping over your computer all day, think about your posture. It could actually make a difference.
A little life hack. I like it. But wait, isn't this all a bit ruthless?
That's a good point. Peterson does talk about competition and dominance, but he also emphasizes the importance of chaos and order.
Chaos and order, as in, like, the universe.
Kind of. He uses the image of a frozen lake.
Okay, this should be good.
Imagine you're walking across the ice. The solid ice is like order, stability, predictability.
I can see that.
Right. It gives you that sense of security. But then you hit a thin patch and fall through.
Yikes.
That's chaos. The unexpected, the unpredictable, things that can disrupt our lives.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
So life is this constant dance between these two forces.
So what? We need a bit of both.
Exactly. Too much order and we get stuck. Too much chaos and it's overwhelming. Peterson uses all kinds of stories to illustrate this, like Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden.
Right, the fall from grace. Shifting from pure order to a world with chaos.
Exactly. Or Pinocchio's journey to rescue his father from the whale, that chaotic unknown.
Classic hero's journey.
Right. So navigating this interplay of chaos and order is key for a meaningful life.
Finding that sweet spot, that balance.
That's the idea.
This is pretty deep stuff.
It is. And another thing that struck me about Peterson's approach is his focus on personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility, okay.
He kind of pushes back against the idea that we're just, products of our circumstances or entitled to certain outcomes.
We're in control of our own destiny.
Exactly. Taking responsibility is essential for creating meaning and purpose. He even tells a story about a student who initially resisted this message.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the student felt like it was unfair to put the burden of responsibility on individuals.
Especially when there are so many, well, systemic problems in the world.
Yeah, but later, that same student realized that focusing on what he could control, his own choices and actions, that's what turned his life around.
Interesting.
So instead of blaming others or feeling like a victim, focus on what you can do to make your life better.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And that's just the beginning.
I can't wait to hear more. It's like realizing, hey, I'm actually the driver in this crazy thing called life.
I like that. Yeah. We're not just along for the ride.
Exactly. And that kind of segues into Rule 4, which is super relevant these days. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Oh, man, that's so true, especially with social media, right? Everyone's always showing off their perfect lives.
It's a recipe for feeling inadequate, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
You get caught in that comparison trap. It can really mess with your self-esteem, and it just fuels that inner critic we all have.
Oh, tell me about it.
Peterson actually tells this story about answering a question on Quora, what makes life more meaningful? You know, just a random question.
Yeah.
And his answer blew up, got way more attention than any of his other responses.
Oh, wow. So what was so special about his answer?
That's the thing. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it made him realize that people are really craving meaning, more than happiness even, or success.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense, though, right?
Yeah.
If you're always comparing yourself, you're never going to be content.
Exactly. So yeah, instead of focusing on how you stack up against others, focus on your own progress, on becoming a better you.
That's where the real satisfaction lies. I love that.
Yeah, it's not about denying your flaws or pretending everything's perfect. We're all works in progress. It's about the journey.
The journey, yes.
Peterson actually offers some advice for dealing with that inner critic too, you know, quieting that voice.
Oh, yeah. How do you do that?
Small steps. Don't try to do everything at once. Focus on achievable improvements.
So like celebrating the little wins.
Exactly. It's all about progress, not perfection.
Love it. This is really resonating with me.
Glad to hear it. And speaking of progress, that ties into another big theme in the book, discipline and sacrifice. Peterson even links it back to Adam and Eve.
Whoa, hold on. Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
How does that connect to discipline?
He brings up this idea of delay of gratification, you know, choosing something harder now for a better outcome later.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
So Peterson says Adam and Eve eating the apple, that's like losing that immediate gratification. They realized that real fulfillment takes effort.
It's like they traded paradise for the freedom to choose, even if those choices bring, well, suffering sometimes.
That's a really interesting way to put it. And he uses other stories from the Bible too, like Cain and Abel, where envy and resentment lead to, well, to bad things.
Yeah, definitely. And the temptation of Christ in the desert, another classic struggle with choosing the hard right over the easy wrong.
Right. Peterson uses these stories to show these really timeless human struggles.
Yeah, it's amazing how he makes these ancient stories feel so relevant today.
It's one of his strengths, for sure. And when it comes to this whole discipline thing, it's not about being miserable.
Right, it's not about deprivation.
It's about recognizing that everything worthwhile, well, it has a price.
So if you want to achieve your goals, build a meaningful life, you got to be willing to put in the work, make some sacrifices.
Exactly. And that idea leads perfectly into Peterson's focus on seeking truth and meaning.
Even when it's tough.
Especially when it's tough. He really encourages us to grapple with the big questions. And he doesn't shy away from the darkness either.
Yeah, he talks a lot about evil, doesn't he?
He does. Like, the story of Cain and Abel, again, it illustrates that we all have the capacity for violence. Evil isn't just some abstract concept. It's a potential within each of us.
That's pretty heavy stuff. So how do we deal with that? All that darkness both inside us and out in the world.
Peterson says recognizing that potential for evil, well, that's the first step. Being honest with ourselves about our shadow side.
The parts of ourselves we don't like to admit to.
Exactly. And being aware of how evil can show up in the world. It's not about saying we're all inherently bad, but that we have the capacity for both good and evil.
And it's up to us to choose which path to follow.
Precisely. And that leads to one of the most powerful parts of the book, Peterson's take on Christ's temptation in the desert.
Oh, I'm really interested in that. He always has these fascinating interpretations of these biblical stories.
He really does. He sees Christ's 40 days in the wilderness as this metaphor for like a dark night of the soul. That experience a lot of us go through, facing isolation, despair.
Wow, it's like this universal human experience.
Yeah.
coming face to face with our own inner demons.
Exactly. And it's so interesting how Peterson analyzes the three temptations, turning stones into bread, throwing himself off the cliff, and worshiping Satan.
Each one is like giving up in a different way.
Right. It's surrendering to something that seems easier, more expedient, but ultimately betrays your values.
It's like those times we're tempted to take shortcuts or compromise what we believe in.
Exactly. And Peterson says that resisting those temptations, staying true to your values, even when it's hard, that's what defines a truly good life.
So sticking to your principles, making the hard choices, that's the path to a meaningful life.
That's the idea. And he connects this to the decline of Christianity in the West, too, which is, well, it's a controversial topic.
Yeah, for sure.
He's not saying we need to go back to traditional religion, but he acknowledges that there's this void now, this loss of shared meaning, and it often gets filled by, well, by nihilism, cynicism.
Yeah, like a sense that nothing really matters.
Right. So he challenges us to find something that transcends the individual, that gives our lives purpose beyond just our own needs and desires.
Something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. It could be spiritual, it could be a commitment to a cause, whatever connects you to something larger.
I think that's something a lot of people are searching for.
Definitely. And this leads to another area Peterson dives into, his critique of postmodernism and ideological thinking in general.
Oh yeah, that's another topic that gets people fired up.
For sure. Peterson argues that while some of these ideas might seem progressive on the surface, they can actually be pretty paralyzing.
How so?
Well, he sees postmodernism, with its focus on the relativity of truth, as a kind of intellectual nihilism. It's like saying there's no such thing as objective truth, which can lead to hopelessness.
Like, if everything is relative, then nothing really matters.
Exactly. And he's critical of the tendency to reduce everything to power dynamics, to see the world as just oppressors versus the oppressed.
So while acknowledging that power dynamics exist, he's saying we shouldn't view everything through that lens.
Right. It can create a lot of resentment and division, making it hard to have real dialogue or work together. He's calling for more nuance, a recognition of human complexity.
Individual responsibility alongside systemic change.
Exactly. And he even connects this back to evil, saying that ideologies that deny objective good and evil can actually make tyranny more likely.
So it's not about labeling any specific ideology as evil, but being wary of embracing any belief system blindly.
Right. Question your assumptions, think critically, be open to different perspectives.
Don't get caught in an echo chamber.
Exactly. And this actually leads to the idea that rules and limits, well, they can be liberating.
That sounds counterintuitive. How can rules be liberating?
He uses the analogy of a game. A game without rules is just chaos. It's the rules that give the game structure, make it challenging, and ultimately fun.
Okay, I see that. So we need some structure in our lives to thrive.
That's the idea. And one of the most memorable rules in the book is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Focus on your own growth first.
Right. It's not about ignoring injustice, but recognizing that you can't fix the world if your own life's a mess.
Be the change you want to see.
Exactly. And this leads to another great rule. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
Don't settle for mediocrity.
Exactly. Find what lights you up, what gives your life purpose.
It might be different for everyone, but it's about finding that thing that makes it all worthwhile.
Exactly. And Peterson challenges us to think about our legacy, the impact we want to make. It's pretty inspiring stuff.
It is. And it all circles back to honesty and integrity, which he seems to value highly.
Absolutely. He sees lying, both to ourselves and others, as a form of self-sabotage. It creates this dissonance, this gap between who we are and who we pretend to be.
And that erodes our self-respect.
Exactly. He challenges us to be honest about our strengths and weaknesses, our motivations, our choices.
It's about having the courage to face the truth, even when it's uncomfortable.
Right. And he extends this to society as a whole. He calls for a cultural renewal, a return to valuing truth and holding liars accountable.
Yeah, I think a lot of people long for that, especially with all the misinformation and spin these days.
It's a really relevant message,
Yeah.
And Peterson doesn't just talk about it abstractly. He shares stories about how dishonesty has impacted his own life and his patients' lives.
So he shows the real-world consequences of lying and the power of truth-telling.
Exactly. And this focus on honesty leads naturally to Rule 8, listen to others.
That seems pretty straightforward, but I bet Peterson has a deeper take on it.
You bet. He distinguishes between actually listening and just waiting for your turn to speak.
Or just trying to confirm your own biases.
Right. True listening, he says, takes humility, empathy. a real desire to understand the other person's perspective.
Even if you disagree.
Especially if you disagree, it can be transformative. Help us break out of our echo chambers.
Build bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. And that brings us to Rule 9, which kind of builds on that idea. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't.
Oh, I love that. Such a good reminder to be humble.
Right. Don't dismiss people just because they have different views.
Be open to learning something new.
Exactly. Peterson even shares examples from his own life where he learned valuable lessons from unexpected sources, people he might have initially disagreed with.
It's a good reminder that wisdom can come from anywhere.
Absolutely. And speaking of learning, Rule 10 is all about being precise with our language.
Okay, so choose your words carefully.
More than that, it's about clear, concise, accurate communication. That's how you build trust, solve problems.
So being vague or using sloppy language can actually lead to misunderstandings.
Exactly. Peterson says it can even lead to conflict. He wants us to be intentional with our words.
Make sure they reflect our true thoughts and intentions.
Exactly. It's a sign of respect for yourself and others. And it ties back to honesty, too. Sloppy language can be a way of hiding the truth.
Interesting. So clear communication is essential for building honest relationships.
Exactly. And it helps us engage in more meaningful conversations, which leads to one of the most fun rules. Do not bother children when they are skateboarding.
Wait, what? Where did that come from?
I know, right? It seems random, but it's actually a metaphor for letting kids take risks, explore their limits.
Skateboarding is definitely all about pushing boundaries.
Right. Peterson sees it as representing that adventurous spirit we need to cultivate in young people. We often try to protect them from everything.
We don't want them to get hurt.
But he argues that by doing that, we prevent them from developing resilience and independence.
It's like they need to fall down sometimes to learn how to get back up.
Exactly. So yeah, it's not about being reckless, but giving kids the space to learn and grow from their experiences.
Finding that balance between safety and freedom.
Precisely. Trust their resilience. Believe in their ability to learn.
That's a great message for parents, educators, really anyone who works with kids.
Definitely. And finally, we come to Rule 12, which is all about embracing the simple joys in life. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street.
Okay, now that one really threw me for a loop. What's the wisdom behind petting a random cat?
It's a reminder to be present, to notice the beauty around us. We often rush through life, focus on our to-do lists.
We forget to enjoy the journey.
Exactly. So Peterson's saying, slow down, savor the moment, appreciate the little things.
Like petting a cat.
Exactly. It's about cultivating gratitude, mindfulness. Life isn't just about achieving goals. It's about experiencing those moments of joy and connection.
Finding those little sparks of happiness in everyday life.
Exactly. And that brings us to the end of our exploration of Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
Wow, that was a whirlwind tour of some pretty deep concepts. What were some of your biggest takeaways?
You know, honestly, one of the things that really hit home for me was how Peterson blends all these different ideas together, like science, psychology, philosophy, those ancient stories. It's a really unique approach to living a better life.
Yeah, it's definitely not your average self-help book. He's not just giving you a list of tips and tricks. He's really exploring what it means to be human. And you're right, his use of stories and myths it's fascinating.
It's not something you usually see in these kinds of books.
Right, he doesn't just skim the surface either. He goes deep. Like those biblical stories, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, even Christ's temptation in the desert. He sees those as symbolic, right? Not necessarily literal events, but representations of these universal struggles we all face.
So it's like he's unlocking this hidden wisdom within those stories.
Exactly. And he connects them to modern psychology, too. Neuroscience, evolutionary biology, showing how those ancient insights still hold true today. It's really remarkable. Yeah, it's like bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and modern science.
Right.
We're not just getting a rehash of old stories. We're getting a whole new perspective.
Absolutely. And he makes it personal, too, sharing his own experiences, how those stories have influenced his life.
That's what makes his work so relatable. He's not just some distant expert. He's someone who's grappled with these questions himself.
Exactly. And it all comes back to the central idea of taking responsibility, making choices that align with your values, becoming the best version of yourself.
It's a really empowering message, recognizing that we have the power to choose our own path.
We're not just victims of circumstance. We can create meaning, make a difference.
Exactly. And that's a really hopeful message.
It is. Peterson challenges us to step into that power, to live a life that's both meaningful and fulfilling. not just for ourselves, but for the world.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that it's not just a set of rules, it's a framework for thinking about life's big questions and finding a path that, well, that's both challenging and rewarding.
And I think Peterson would agree that it's an ongoing journey, not a destination. Stay curious, keep learning, and keep striving to make your life a masterpiece. That's the real message here.
Beautifully put. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it thought-provoking and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Until next time, keep exploring those big questions, keep those conversations going, and hey, if you see a cat on the street, give it a pet. You never know what kind of wisdom you might find.
And that brings us to the end of another insightful episode. Remember, true strength comes not from avoiding hardship, but from facing it head-on with courage and integrity, as we've explored today through 12 Rules for Life. Harper, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on the importance of personal responsibility and the power of truth in shaping not only our individual lives, but also the world around us. Your insights on Peterson's work were truly enlightening. And Tony, your questions, as always, were spot on. If today's discussion sparked something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What rule from the book resonates with you the most? Your engagement helps us grow this community and continue to bring you valuable content. Want to dive deeper into these concepts? Grab a copy of 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos. You can find the Amazon link in the description. Thank you all for joining us. Embrace the challenge, find your meaning, and until next time, keep striving to become the best version of yourself.